setup, you got it.
I do.
All right, thank you, sir.
Good morning, Dr. Downs.
Good morning.
If you would please just say your name and spell it for the court reporter.
James Claude Upshaw Downs, MD, DOWNS.
Thank you, sir. Where all are you employed?
I've worked several different places. I'm here today as an associate medical examiner for Gwinnett County. I also work in Charleston, South Carolina as a coroner's pathologist. Additionally, I work as the medical director for the physician assistant program at Charleston Southern University. And also, I'm a medical legal consultant. I have a consulting business.
How long have you been employed in these various roles?
In all of those different.
Yes.
So I started consulting while I was working my last job. So that was probably 90, 91, something like that. Started working for the Gwinnett County office in 2017 and started working at Charleston, I think, 2020. And I've been doing medical examiner work for 35 years.
Please tell the jury about your education background and training.
I got my Bachelor of Science degree in biochemistry, magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Georgia. I did my medical school training in Charleston, South Carolina, my hometown. I also did my residency training in anatomic pathology and clinical pathology. That was also at the Medical University of South Carolina. I did my fellowship in forensic pathology again at the Medical University of South Carolina. That did include a month in the Dade County, Florida, the Miami Medical Examiner Department. In addition, during the course of that training, I did an internship at the FBI Behavioral Sciences Unit in Quantico, Virginia. Since graduating the residency and fellowship, I've done continuing medical education on an annual basis ever since.
Is performing autopsies part of one or more of your jobs?
Yes.
How many autopsies would you estimate you've performed in your career?
Personally, I've probably done something like 8,000. I've assisted in another couple of thousand. In my former job as the chief medical examiner for the state of Alabama, we did something like 1,500, 2,000 postmortem cases a year. All told, I think it's safe to say that I've been part of 16, 17, 18,000 postmortem cases.
Have you ever testified at trial before?
Many times.
Have you ever been qualified as an expert in forensic pathology at trial?
Many times.
Can you estimate about how many times you've testified as an expert in forensic pathology?
I can tell you that it's probably hundreds. I've given sworn testimony in 20 different states, in federal courts, for military tribunals, including the Air Force, the Army, the Coast Guard. I've also given sworn testimony before committees of the U.S. House and U.S. Senate, and additionally before the National Commission on Forensic Sciences.
Your Honor, this time the state moves to tender Dr. Downs as an expert in forensic pathology pursuant to the questions we just asked and the stipulation of the parties.
Mr. Greenwell? No objection. He's qualified as an expert.
What is the purpose of an autopsy?
I guess the main purpose is to determine what happened to an individual, cause and manner of death. In addition, if there's any information to be gained in addition to specifically cause and manner, to gather that. If it's a case where there's evidence to be collected, to gather that. That would be, for example, photographs, if there are injuries, if there's trace evidence, to collect anything like that.
What does cause of death mean?
Cause of death is the initial event that set in motion the unbroken chain of events that ended in death. In other words, something happens, there's either it's immediate or there's a time, and then the person dies. So the cause is this over here that started that whole chain going.
What is manner of death?
Manner of death is the circumstances under which the cause happened. So there's 5 different possibilities for manner of death. Natural, self-explanatory, you have a heart attack, natural death. Accident, something unforeseen, reasonably unforeseeable. I could leave the courthouse and get hit by a bus. That's unforeseen. Suicide, death by your own hand. Homicide, death by the hand of another, and that can either be active or passive. For instance, neglect, active neglect, that act is a homicide. And then finally, if you can't tell, undetermined.
Are autopsies only performed for homicides?
No, probably most of the cases we do these days would either be natural or accident.
When bodies are brought to the morgue for an autopsy, are they assigned a case number?
Yes, they are.
When a body is received, are you given any background information on the body?
Yes, I am.
Why is that information important?
Well, I mean, you've been to the doctor, and the first thing that happens to you when you go to the doctor is, why are you here? As a physician, I need to understand the questions that are being asked so that I know what tests to perform, kind of an idea of what to look for, either to include or exclude. So it's critical that I have some kind of information. And even if I have no information, that does help me kind of a little bit tell me what I need to look for in this case. So the more information I get, the better.
Does the medical examiner's office have investigators?
Yes, we do.
What do they do?
They are my eyes and ears at the scene. Because there are only two of us who work at the ME's office here in Gwinnett, we can't go to all the scenes. So we have multiple different investigators who are highly skilled professionals who go to a scene, assess the scene, determine preliminarily what they think might be what happened, and then send the case in or decline it, because we don't bring in every single case. There are cases that don't need an autopsy. There are cases that don't even need an external examination. Then there are other cases that clearly need an autopsy in order to find out what happened.
Do the investigators document what they see when they go out to the scene?
Yes.
How do they do that?
They do that by means of photographs, multiple photographs, as well as a written report.
And do you review the photographs and the reports prior to doing an autopsy?
The report usually is not written by the time I do the autopsy. The photographs may or may not be reviewed before the autopsy. It really depends on the circumstances.
Can you walk the jury through the steps of conducting an autopsy in general?
Sure. So we've been through kind of the preliminary. I get a story. I get some history. And based on that history, I kind of set in my mind, okay, here's what I'm looking for. This is going to be an external exam, or this is going to be a full autopsy, and it's going to require lots of documentation. The case we're here about today is one of the latter. It's going to require a lot of documentation. So I go in, we open the body bag, pictures of the outside of the body, and then I start looking on the outside of the body to see if there's anything that I think is important. For instance, here, the body is in plastic bags. Okay, that's important, the fact that the body's in plastic bags. So we'll dissect away that layer. Then we'll look underneath that layer. Oh, there's ties around the waist area, the hips, and the arm is tucked under here. And there's another plastic bag tied around the waist. Document all of that. And then we'll kind of go through that process, removing, if there's clothing, after I've looked at the clothing and determined whether or not there's evidence I think is important, we'll go through that. If the body is received wrapped in a sheet, we'll keep the sheet in a case like this, and that'll get transferred in evidence. And so it's a very methodical process. It takes a long time. The outside of the body, the skin is the biggest organ in the body. So believe it or not, usually the outside part of the examination is what takes the most time, because I'm very meticulous, very thorough. I look at everything. Once I get all of that external done, I've collected whatever external evidence. For example, a sexual examination kit, I might do that. Once all of that's completed, we'll then clean the outside of the body and then look again. Basically start over and go head to toe, looking for anything that might be there, front and back. Once I'm satisfied with that, I'll then proceed with an internal examination. And that's an incision, shoulder, down to the middle of the breastbone, and then down the front of the belly. From that, the rib cage is removed, or the front of the rib cage is removed. Examine all the organs in the body and dissect those out, usually one at a time, depends on the circumstances. If I need to keep something together, I will. If there's evidence there to be seen in the organs, like in this case, I'll take individual organ photographs. I'll collect, like in this case, if there's blood collected somewhere, I'll collect and measure that. During the course of this process, depending on what's available to me, I'll collect toxicology samples, so blood or urine, to look at to see if there are any drugs there. Once I complete that part of the examination, I do have an assistant who's helping me with the organ removal process. We're working side by side, but while I'm looking at the organs individually, they will be preparing the head for examination. So they'll make an incision between the ears and the back of the head and dissect the scalp away and basically flip it forward like this. So the scalp is reversed but laying over the face. Then using a saw, they'll make a circular cut around the skull, remove the brain. And of course, I'm here looking at the steps. If there's something to document or see, we got photographs because there's multiple people in the autopsy room with me. Once we complete that part of the process, the brain is removed, and then I look at the brain, and depending on the type of case, the airway. We may do that next to last or last. It just depends on the nature of the case. With the airway, we'll take this flap that was in the front of the chest and dissect that up. So the flap that was here where I made the incision down to the breastbone, we'll take that skin, dissect it back so it again lies over the face, and then remove all the neck structures except for the blood vessels in front up to the tongue, including the tongue, and dissect all of that out. And then I'll look at that as well. Once I have looked at everything like that, I will take microscopic sections, and I may take those along the way if they're external injuries or internal injuries that I think I need to document with a microscope. I'll go ahead and take sections of those, and then I'll look at those microscopic slides, send the toxicology out. If there's anything else to examine, I'll do that, and ultimately I'll end up with a written autopsy report.
Now we're going to get to the case at hand for today. Were you asked to perform an autopsy on Amari Hall in November of 2021?
I was, November 24th.
What background information did you receive when Amari arrived at the morgue?
Basically, the thumbnail sketch was there was this young girl, appeared to be very young, less than 10 years old, who was found in plastic bags in a wooded area, and she appeared to be malnourished. That's kind of the thumbnail sketch. There were multiple obvious injuries externally.
And was she assigned a case number?
She was.
What is that case number?
Give me 1 second. I've blanked on the number as I'm sitting here. 1 second. That's 21G 2057.
I'm going to show you what has been marked as state's exhibits 175 through 184, 186 through 193, 195 through 210, 212, 213, 215, 216, and 218 through 2.
I do.
What are they?
These are some of the photographs from the autopsy of Amari.
And are these fair and accurate representations of Amari's body as you viewed it when you did the autopsy?
They are.
Your Honor, this time the state moves to introduce into evidence, tender into evidence states 175 through 184, 186 to 193, 195 to 210, 212, 213, 215, 216, and 218 through 226.
What was the last number? Was it around 218 through?
226.
Previously, seen judge, no. Admitted without objection.
And may I publish these exhibits, Your Honor?
You may.
Dr. Downs, did you create a PowerPoint containing several of the state's exhibits as well as some diagrams that you believe will help explain the injuries in this case to the jury?
I did.
We have the HDMI input up, Your Honor?
It is.
Okay, just making sure.
Way ahead of you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay. What information is contained on this slide, Dr. Downs?
The case number up at the top, 21G 2057, Amari Hall. Her date of birth, 10/30/13. date of death, that's the date that she was pronounced, not the actual day that she died, was November 23rd of 21, and pronounced at a little before 1 p.m. I did my exam the next day, a little before 11:30 in the morning on the 24th, and cause of death, multiple blunt force injuries, other significant conditions. Those are things that aren't reflected in the cause, but are also important in her death. And those other conditions were battered child syndrome, malnutrition, and the manner of death, homicide.
Can you define battered child syndrome for the jury?
That is a description to describe multiple wounds in multiple locations in multiple stages of healing. That is a child who has been abused with injuries in multiple different areas that happened at different times, so different episodes. And they're in multiple stages of healing in multiple different areas on the body.
What is a blunt force injury?
So there's several different big categories. A gunshot wound is a type of injury. A fire injury, a thermal injury is a type of injury. Blunt force is by a blunt, a non-edged weapon. So a sharp force injury would be like a knife, glass, something like that. Blunt force would be like a baseball bat, a brick, any broad, flat surface. Doesn't necessarily have to be broad, but a flat surface. And there are three types of wounds that happen. There is a bruise, medically we call that a contusion, but it's the same thing. An abrasion, that's like when you fall on the sidewalk and skin your knee, that would be an abrasion. And the last type is, actually there's two others, but they're both lacerations. Laceration is a physical tearing of the tissue, ripping the tissue. So on skin, the skin wound would gape open. You can also lacerate bone, that's a fracture.
You mentioned baseball bats when describing blunt force injuries. Could the floor be part of a blunt force injury?
Sure, it's a broad, flat surface, absolutely. Abrasion, like you fall and skin your knee, that would be an abrasion, a blunt force injury from the floor as the offending weapon.
Could hands and feet cause blunt force injuries?
Sure.
We're going to go to the next slide. This is State's Exhibit 140. What are we seeing here?
So this is Amari's body. She's in plastic bags. You can see covering her upper body down to just above her waist. At the waist area, you see another plastic bag that's tied around the waist, and within that, there's plastic about a yard length of black fabric that's been tied, involving that second plastic bag. And then the third plastic bag goes from the thigh level down and covers the feet. So she's been placed head to toe in two plastic bags, and they've been pulled away from the midsection, so you can see her butt would be towards us as we're looking at the picture. Her thighs would be going away from us. She's laying on her left side.
This is State's 175.
So this is a close-up kind of the same area we just looked at. Instead, we have now turned the picture, so if we were looking at the picture before with her butt in the foreground, we just turned the picture like this and walked in and got a closer picture. So her butt is now to my left, and her thighs are at the bottom going to my right. You can see that plastic bag that's tied around her waist, and then the black cord, that 3 foot or length of cord that's tied in that.
Dr. Downs, there's a pointer just under this monitor here if you would like to use that, if you want to stand up.
Thank you.
Your Honor, is it okay if he gets up?
He may.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What was the significance of this photo in your investigation?
So, as I mentioned, we want to document what's there, what we see. The fact that somebody has been, the body has been disposed of within plastic bags, that's a purposeful act. That didn't just inadvertently happen. She was placed inside these bags. The fact that this is knotted, this third bag is knotted and tied around, and the black fabric is also knotted together, that took time and effort and thought. That didn't just happen.
Okay. Moving to State's Exhibit 176.
So now the bags have been pulled away, you can see down here toward her feet area. And the notable thing to me here is we've got some scabbing here, so older injury on the ankle, the outside of the left ankle. In addition, there's a linear mark here, and you can see a finger linear mark here. Those are consistent with binding, like somebody tying her legs together. And since it's old, it's healing. This didn't happen around the time of death. This happened before. Now, there may also have been other tying around the time of death, but this is fresher or older than that.
Are you able to say how old it is or not?
Not really. It's not that precise. I can only see that I see evidence of healing here. I see scabbing. I see red margins. Those are all signs of body reacting. So it happened earlier. May have been multiple episodes, but there's definitely one here, and then this may be fresher over the same area.
This is States 177.
And we see an abrasion here, again, rubbing of the superficial skin surface. And again, you see that same horizontal linear pattern. This is on the right lower leg, and you'll see multiple parallel lines. You can also see them up higher. I didn't have any corresponding ties or ligatures around the legs. This looks like it's scabbing, so again, this is an older injury. This wasn't when she died. This happened days before. It wasn't right around the time she died. This is not that same day.
You said ligature. Is that just like a rope or some of the other
Yeah,
thing?
a tie. So anytime I use that word ligature, and I apologize for the verbiage, it's kind of how we talk about stuff. So if I can, I'll just refer to like a rope or something. So that may be easier.
Well, you can say ligature now that you told us what it means.
Okay.
All right, this is States 178.
So here, this is from her left side, and the most notable thing to me is how skinny she is. She is remarkably skinny. When you compare her to height, she's very tall for her age, but she's also very thin. So when you put those two together, she's less than the 5th percentile. So you know those big bell curves where you have everybody 50% is in the middle? She's way over beyond the margin, beyond the curve, past 2 standard deviations. So she's unusually skinny. You can see her ribs sticking out. You can see how narrow her waist is. This child's been malnourished, hasn't gotten sufficient food. Beyond that, then I start looking, and I'll just start at the head. I see some dark discoloration around the eye. I see some open defects. There's a dark discoloration here on the chin. In addition, there's a healing laceration on the underside of the jaw. And you'll just notice as you go down, multiple, the lighter tan pink, those are areas where the skin surface has gone away. And once you get past the very superficial surface layer of skin, all the pigment cells are in that layer. So once that is abraded away, once that skin surface is away, everybody has that same color as the subcutaneous, underneath the superficial layer of the skin. And you can see, again, just going down, multiple different wounds, abrasions, some excoriations, which is a different type of abrasion. Again, the skin surface is gone. A deeper healing wound here on the left wrist, a very large grouping of abrasions here on the left thigh. You can see some stuff going on in the abdomen and some stuff over on the other arm.
Moving to States Exhibit 179.
So this is the same general area, but you can see better here. This mark on the belly we'll come back to. And if you look, you'll start to see what look like maybe some bumps over here on the side of the chest, some darker areas of skin that I can't do a whole lot with. I want to look at that when I get the skin surface off. So that's what I'm focusing on in this picture, just the darker areas to try to determine, okay, what is this that I'm looking at? And I also have to remember that she's been out in the woods for a while. So one of the things I have to think about when I'm doing my exam, is this a real injury? Or is this from animals coming after the fact and eating on the remains? I have to be cognizant of that. I do know that there was a 5 or 6 inch hole in that bag around her face, that gave animals access to her face. So I know there's facial stuff that's artifact.
This is states 180.
This is on the right arm, and you see an older scarred injury, linear. That could be from something like what I'm holding in my hand, hitting the upper arm and causing a wound that's scabbed and healed as a scar. And then the other stuff down below that we already looked at.
This is states 181.
And this is a closer up of that area on the left back of the forearm. You can see here where you've got an abrasion or an excoriation here. You've got the same thing here, but this is healing. The edges you see are kind of a different color, and they're a little heaped up. So these are healing wounds here, some healing here. This is healing. And then you've got some scabbing here and some blistering here that's non-specific. I can't really do anything with that blistering.
This is states 182.
This is down now on the left hand and left forearm near the hand. You can see a healing erosion, ulceration on the back of the left forearm and some scarring on the back of the hand.
States 183.
This is on the left upper arm. Now, we looked before on the outside. This is on the inside, and you see a linear, what looks to be an abrasion. It could be a healing abrasion there on the arm, and also some darker discoloration closer to the elbow, and then some likely artifact down there at the elbow crease.
States 184.
This is the, I believe, the inside of that left forearm. Again, some blistering. I can't do a whole lot with that. Some scabbing and healing here, scabbing and healing, and then this we didn't see before at all, scabbing and healing here. So all of these, again, older injuries. This isn't what happened the day that she died. This is earlier, they're scabbing.
When you say you can't do a lot with the blistering, what do you mean? You can't determine where it came from or what?
I don't want to overcall something. Okay, I want to tell you what I can see as a forensic pathologist. But I also don't want to tell you this is a wound and it's not be a wound. So there are some things that I'm going to say I don't know because I don't. And I don't want to give you the false impression that I have all the answers. This child has so many different injuries and artifact. Artifact is something that looks like it could be an injury, but it really is not. I don't want to mislead you and tell you these artifacts are real injuries. They're not. So if I can't tell you, I'm going to say I can't say. They could be, they could not be. There are stuff that clearly is artifact. And if I can tell you that, I will.
Thank you, sir. This is stage 186.
So now we're going more to the front. And thing we see a little better here is that mark across the abdomen. Again, that's a very linear mark. That could be, again, something like a cylindrical object like the pointer that I'm holding in my hand. It's taking the skin surface off here. There's some, looks like it's probably some healing here, but that's an abrasion. And then more other injuries trailing off the abdomen. This crosshatched area in the right upper abdomen, and that's important because that's where the liver is. And as we get to the inside of the body, that'll become obvious why this area at the liver is important in this case. Then going over to the right arm, we can see the same kind of pattern we saw on the left. Multiple different wounds, multiple different locations, multiple different stages of healing. In addition, I mentioned the laceration under the chin. You can see that better. There's what looks to be some artifact around the eye here. So that's not real. It looks like it could be something. It's not. It's just not. Very typically, animals will come in and they will eat around the eyes. They'll eat around the mouth. So we kind of expect to see those types of injuries in those locations.
This is stage 187.
Again, I specifically draw your attention to here, this crosshatch type pattern here in the right abdomen. That's my main focus here. We saw also earlier this injury on the left thigh that's kind of coming to the front a little bit here.
Stage 188.
And that's specifically a different angle. there is some type of pattern here. A pattern injury would be like you're walking on the beach and you look down and you see a footprint. You know it's a footprint. It looks like a footprint. You may not be able to say whose foot it is. Probably can tell it's a left or a right foot. But sometimes there's so much detail, I can tell you it's a Nike size 10.5 and it's this particular brand or this particular model of a Nike. That's not what's happened here. Something caused that. Something has a very distinct pattern. If you gave me 10 objects and one of them included this, I should be able to say, oh, of these 10, I think it's that object. I can't do that here because I don't have the 10 objects. So I recognize there's a pattern of something here. I just don't know what.
What type of injury is that? Is that a burn or an
All right,
abrasion?
so this is an abrasion, and it's deeper here where it's lighter pigment. It could be a burn. If you got a surface hot and branded somebody, it certainly could cause something like that. I can't tell you that that is a burn.
States 189.
All right, so there are a couple of things that are notable here in addition to some scarring, again, older injuries. What struck me here is the lack of muscular development. She's just got no muscles because, again, I think she's malnourished. And you see these bony, knobby knees in a little kid. That's very unusual in my experience. So that's really what stands out to me here.
States 190.
This is moving down the legs. Again, you see some scarring. You see scabbing, so older injury on the outside of the ankle. This is what looks like a ligature mark, and it's healing. So an older binding injury.
191.
This is just coming in closer to show you that that is in fact a scab. And that's pretty well along the way of healing.
States 192.
This is closer up on that area of healing here. It looks like some scabbing here. These two look like different ages. It could be that they happened at the same time and that this was just a deeper open wound and this was more superficial. But this broke the skin, and it's an older injury, at least one.
States 193.
Looking at the top of the left foot, we've got an area of blistering here. That's the outside of the ankle, and this old circular healing injury on the top of the foot. That's not an easy place to injure. Not an easy place to injure. Several different things come to mind as to what might have caused that, but I can't tell you what did cause it.
This is States 195.
So here, you see these lines here, all that's artifact, okay? That's like a cat or a dog or something clawing at the face. Likely, these are teeth. And then you come up here, and this is what stands out to me most of all. That's a laceration or a tear of the frenulum, the inside of the lip. That is commonly seen with a punch to the face.
States 196.
So now we're looking at the lower lip, and again, you see this stuff that's artifact, but in the middle of the lower lip is a very large laceration. And that is not artifact. It could be that something is eating at a prior injury, but to go to that location, in my experience, would be unusual. So I believe there's an existing injury at that site as well.
Meaning it would be unusual for an animal to get into that area of the body, is that what you mean?
Animals are lazy. They're going to go where the food is readily available. That's why they go to the eyes and the mouth. Because when we die, we leak blood, which is attractive for animals to eat. And so they'll start there. If you have a wound, that's where they're going to start eating. We call that inappropriate decomposition because we know patterns of how bodies decompose. This is not a normal pattern of decomposition. So I believe that an animal ate an existing wound there.
States 197.
So we're looking at the front of the neck here, and it's scaly up here at the top of the neck. You can see the laceration on the underside of the chin. And then there's some superficial stuff here. I can't tell you exactly what that is. And then you see the pale scars.
States 198.
This is the left side of the neck. You can see the darker discoloration here. Sometimes it's hard to tell externally if there's an injury there or not. There's not any specific injury here. But the scaly skin surface is what draws my attention. I'm also looking to see ears. Ears are common areas that are injured in child abuse cases. People will grab the ear, pop the ear. So we always look at the ears to see if there's anything there, and you can see a little abrasion there.
States 199.
Looking at now at the right side of the head, and there's injuries here to the outside of the right ear. There's also some you see later to the other side. And that's the main purpose here, as well as this linear mark on the neck. Now that is something. That is not a pattern of discoloration or something. There is an existing injury there.
You mentioned that we might see later what's under the blue square there. We're going to save the jury from showing them that again. Can you just describe the injury that's on her face up there?
So the blue square is what you're
Yes,
talking
where the
about?
blue square is.
So animals have basically taken that whole everything that's covered by the blue for the most part, animals are eaten.
Thank you. States 200.
So same thing here, and I'm coming down. Now I'm looking at the side, because one of the things about interpreting injuries is I want to do a three-dimensional look at things. We live in a three-dimensional world, so bodies are three-dimensional. So even though it's a similar picture, it's indifferent. And the difference is important because bodies are not flat. So I have to look at this in the context of, okay, I've got the rib margin here, and I couldn't really appreciate that the other way, how sunken this is. So it allows me to do that. It also gives me a look at how skinny her belly is. And I'm looking better at the right side here. I'm also looking down here at the right leg, and a different mark, different pattern on the right arm. Again, you start seeing now, you've seen several of these before, that horizontal linear pattern with an erosion that's healing. Again, around the forearm. This looks like a ligature, a binding injury. You've got some other stuff here that's higher up. That could be binding. It could also be with a rod-like object that's broken the skin. This has some healing associated with it. Scarring here, so different time window here, and then vertical. All right, so this is an object that hits and then changes direction. So that's not one, unless you've got some weird object that has these four lines. That's four different blows at a prior time.
States 201.
So now I'm looking at specifically at the thighs, and again, what draws my attention here is her lack of muscle development. It's striking to me. Here, I've got some abrasions, but I also noticed that for the most part, her legs are spared. That's important to me, because in interpreting injuries, why would somebody's arms be involved and her legs be spared? And there's something that we call defensive injuries, where a subject that is being attacked tries to ward off blows. And there's basically only two things you can do. You can cover either side of your arm, could be the surface to your assailant, or you can try to punch back, which is going to be really hard for a weaker subject to do against a stronger assailant.
States 202.
Moving down, again, to remind you of these marks on the lower legs, and they're on both sides. And I mentioned just now defensive injuries and why you might only have them on the upper extremities. If your legs are bound, they're not going to be a good weapon to fend off blows with, leaving only your arms free to potentially fight off blows.
Did you see those ligature marks on the insides of the ankles as well, or just the outsides?
I believe they're just on the outsides, and if you think about it, if you're trying to get out of ligatures, you're not pushing together, you're pulling out, so the ligature would bind or rub on the outside.
States 203.
So here we've got multiple linear scabs, so this is not artifact. You've got some scarring here with hyperpigmentation. The skin gets a little darker around that. That's common in people with darker skin. If they get an injury, sometimes it'll come back and it'll be lighter, and sometimes it'll be darker. So that's what I'm looking at here. I've got another injury here. Again, that injury around the neck. And then an old linear mark here on the upper arm. And what looks like a darker area, that could be a bruise right there.
States 204.
Again, looks like, I believe the right arm, and just closer up showing you these overlapping linear patterns that have that same scab on one end and deeper healing injury on the other.
States 205.
This is a close-up on that right neck injury. I see what looks like some scabbing up at the top, and I can't tell you specifically. That could be something around the neck, a ligature around the neck, but it doesn't go all the way around. It could also be a blow with, again, a cylindrical object like this. That's just so non-specific, I can't tell you what caused it, but something caused it. Some injury caused that at a prior time.
States 206.
Looking, I believe we're down to the legs now, and area around the knee. Again, the same pattern we've seen over and over again. Scabbing with a deeper healing injury associated with one end of that. Linear, generally speaking.
States 207.
Looks like a healing injury here, and then multiple areas of scarring on the palm, and looks like a braided area here, closer to the thumb. So palm injuries. Typically when you fall, we have a reflex called the parachute reflex. When you fall, your hands go out to protect you. So that could be from that process, or they could be specific inflicted injuries to the palm. I can't tell you which.
States 208.
This is showing now more to the lower right side of the abdomen. Again, the same type of pattern. So it looks like we're seeing that same linear mark, deeper on one edge, healing on the other, as though you were hitting with a rod, and it goes deeper on one edge, and then where there's less contact with the skin surface, that's the scab part. So the deeper part is actually ulcerating the skin.
States 209.
Broader abrasion, non-specific, that could be anything. It could be from the rug on the floor as the child's going down, and then multiple smaller that I can't tell you what caused those.
States 210.
I told you we'd come back to the right ear. This is the right ear. You can see an area of erosion here, abrasion behind the right ear, and then deeper, closer to the bottom.
States 212.
I think this is to illustrate just a little different view here and to show you that I don't see any continuation on the back side of the legs.
States 213.
And the same thing here, I'm looking around to follow these marks to see where they stop and where they continue, and also to see if there's any defense or injuries consistent with defense on the backs of the legs, different views of the legs as we go around the circumference.
States 215.
This is a close-up, the lower right leg, showing the scabbing, multiple linear, and very limited. Again, it's that area and no other on that leg.
States 216.
This is a scab, I believe, on the outside of the right leg and a small scar. Now, this is the type of thing you'd see in a little kid. Little kids, I've had 4 of them, they fall down. They get boo-boos. That's what I would expect to see. Now, that's a pretty significant scar, but you can get that accidentally trip and fall and cut your leg.
We've seen a few photos now that have the ruler in there. What's the purpose of measuring the injuries?
So that's a standard ruler. It's called ADFO number 2 ruler. It is a standard ruler used worldwide. It's got these quarter-sized circles here, so you know what plane the ruler is in, and it's very specific. You've got 1 centimeter gray, so you know, I believe that's 18% gray, so we know what the contrast is in the picture, and then 1 centimeter black and white alternating with millimeter gradations, and just because I have a hard time keeping it in my brain, a centimeter or 2.5 centimeters is an inch. Okay, so if we go to 3.5 or 2.5 centimeters, that's 1 inch. That gives us an idea between here and here, and here and here. That's about 2 inches.
States 218.
And also, I should mention the, if you go back
Yes,
just a
sir.
second, I forgot to mention. So you'll also see, we'll have that number with the case number in the pictures. This is the ruler that we use as we go around and take all these pictures. We put the ruler in there so we know it's this case.
All right, back to 218.
Again, we're looking again around the legs. I'm also looking at the feet, and we mentioned the scar on the left. We've got one on the right in a very similar area. I really don't know what to make of that. I don't know if that's maybe ill-fitting shoes. I don't know if there's an injury that was inflicted there. I can't tell you because it's scar. There are weapons that cause very characteristic circular scars. I can't tell you this was caused by a weapon. I can only tell you it's a circular scar.
We are going to move to internal now. This is states 219.
So this is the most striking part of the autopsy, visually. I make an incision after we did all the external examination. We went to the internal examination. I make an incision in the belly, and immediately, this is the belly. The pubic bone would be down here. The edge of the rib cage would be up here on both sides. In fact, you can see it right here. That's the left rib cage going up. The liver, and there's all of this blood in the belly. That doesn't belong there. Blood should be inside blood vessels. And this is not only liquid blood, there's blood clot inside the belly. So now I know there is a significant injury inside the body.
And then we've
you can
added,
see-
added states 220 to the
Sorry.
front.
So over here, that's the blood that's here. I pulled it out and I quantified it at 120 milliliters, about 4 ounces.
States 221.
All right, this is the right lung, and there's bruising to the right lung at the point of attachment. So there was significant blunt force injury to the chest, sufficient to cause bruising of the right lung deep inside the body, right at the midline. That is a very significant force.
Could being squeezed between 2 hard objects cause that kind of injury?
I would say it's possible. I would prefer some type of forceful motion, for instance, being thrown against something, because basically all of the organs inside the chest are free-floating. They're attached at the top at the airway and attached at the bottom with blood vessels and go to the liver. If you throw somebody against the wall and say they're going, for example, 10 miles an hour. Their body hits the wall. Their internal organs are still going at 10 miles an hour. And so they stretch the tissue. This is the main stem bronchus, the airway. And that's where this bleed looks to be originating from. This is not from a direct blow. Could be from a crushing injury, but I would actually favor a motion injury here.
This shows states 222 and I think with 221 as well, right?
Sure, yeah. So this is the liver, and there's a 3-inch laceration, a 3-inch tear in the liver. Associated with that, and this is different blood volume than what we saw free in the belly, because I can't really quantify it. You can see a significant amount of bleeding associated with this. In addition, it looks like there's a little bit of reaction here. So that tells me this injury has been there a little while in order for white blood cells to come in and collect pus. That could be a couple hours.
Okay. And what's the bottom right picture there?
This is the back of the liver. This is the gallbladder, which would be sitting about right here. And you can see the bleeding into the back surface. The darker discoloration here could be blood settling with gravity, livor mortis. We also see an area of bruising here on the left liver.
Are these injuries to the liver what would have caused the bleeding we saw earlier?
Yeah, the blood that we saw in the belly came from this.
Okay.
There's no other source for the blood in the belly.
Could this be caused by a crushing injury or a direct blow?
Direct blow, and if you'll remember, I drew special attention to that cross-hatched area in the right abdomen at the edge of the ribs. I think that's what caused this. And I would favor something like a crushing injury. Given that you have that crosshatch pattern, I would say it could be a footwear, a shoe, a boot, could be a foot, and we just have a secondary injury over the top of that. But something hit the outside of Amari's body and crushed her liver against her spine.
Could this injury have been caused if the child was laying on the floor and was stomped on?
Yes. That would be an easy explanation for it. That would make sense.
This is states 224 and 225.
So we're looking inside the body. I mentioned at the process of the autopsy, we remove all the organs out. So this is the body, all the organs removed out, and toward the midline here, we're looking where the spine would be. This pale tan thing, that's the aorta, the big blood tube that runs from the heart to the rest of the body. So that's the midline. And over on the right side, at the fifth rib in the back by the spine, there's a healing fracture, old injury. On the left side at the seventh rib, there's a healing fracture, different age, multiple wounds, multiple locations, multiple stages of healing. Clearly, right and left, back, and on the side, these are different wounds, same type of wound, they're both fractures, but they're healing differently and in their different locations. Again, this is part of that battered child syndrome.
I want to jump back, if I can, to the liver injuries. Would there have been any outward signs on the child that this injury had occurred?
I would expect it to be painful. I would expect the child to at least be complaining of abdominal pain, if nothing else.
Is this a survivable injury?
Yep. You take this child to the hospital. They make a foam. They call it gel foam. And you just pack the wound. It causes the blood to clot. That's perfectly survivable injury if treated in time.
And when you say in time, how much time do you think it would have been?
It's hard to say with precision. The sooner the better. And I would think that this injury would be immediately noticeable by outward signs from the child, like pain. So I can't tell you like 32 minutes, that's too much. I can't do that. But I can tell you that you get the child to the doctor within a couple hours of this, depending on the rest of the case, this is potentially survivable.
Now we're going to move forward to states 226.
So as part of doing the autopsy, I mentioned we'll do an incision in the back of the head. This is the left back of the head. So inside the hairline, and there's this large area of bruising that's visible underneath the scalp. You can see the outside here, the hair. So there's a large area of bruising, and this is the same bruise as that. There's a smaller area of bruising over here, but this is a fairly significant bruise to the left back of the head.
Was that injury visible on the external examination?
No.
Okay, what are we seeing here?
So as I mentioned, Amari was very small. Very tall, over 95th percent for height, but 54 pounds. So that's low end of the spectrum for weight, but based on her height, she should weigh a lot more, right? Because she's very tall, her weight should be somewhere close to that 95th. I mean, doesn't have to be 95th, but 75th. Instead, she's down on the opposite end, and if you put those two together, height for weight, she's less than 5th percentile. She's malnourished. And you saw that visually.
What are we seeing on this? You mean to put them all up there or just one at a time?
One at a time will be fine. So what I did is, there's a lot of stuff here. And so I tried to separate out the injuries as to, this is critical. This is something that this person could die of in and of itself. Here she died from all of it. But this is stuff that she needs to get attention for now, if she's going to survive. So the 3-inch laceration on the liver, and I pointed out that 3.5-inch clot that was over it that had some signs of reaction to it. And then there's another bruise, 3/4 of an inch, and bruised liver tissue. So that's the thing that gets, I think, your most acute attention. If that's untreated, you're going to bleed to death. So 4 ounces of blood in the abdomen, that's all associated with that. Okay, so that's critical. Then I said, okay, what are the injuries that, these are fresh, I don't have any doubt that these are fresh injuries that happened around the time she died. And there's a bruise on the central lower lip, 1/2 inch, a little bit bigger than 1/2 inch on the left lower chest. That crosshatch group on the right, and again, that's fresh, which is why it caught my eye, and I thought about that as being that, I think you said stomping, that type of thing. That makes sense as a mechanism. 2.5 inch abrasion on the abdomen, that's that group that ran across the abdomen. And then another group on the right side of the abdomen. And another group we didn't show you for modesty's sake, but there was a 1-inch group of abrasions next to the vagina. And then another abrasion, a little more than 1/2 inch on the right arm. And on the back side of the right arm, there was a little more than 1/4 inch abrasion. And on the back of the, or on the right thigh, 3.5 inch group of abrasion. On the right knee, that individual abrasion, a little more than 1/2 inch. And I should say this one could be from falling down. Okay, so if you fall down, you skin your knee. It's in the right area. That could also be when she collapsed to the ground. Less than 1/4 inch on the left knee, 2 of those. And then on the left shin, there's a wound that I really can't describe any better than a defect. There's 1/10 of an inch hole in the skin, for lack of a better descriptor, but it's so small that I can't tell you exactly what kind of wound, probably blunt force. And then on the back, there was a 3.1 inch group of abrasions, and these also had some scarred borders, so this is not only fresh, there's some signs of healing within this group. So 2 separate types of wounds here.
When you say fresh, are you able to assign a time range to that?
I would say probably within hours of death. Again, the scars, the stuff that has heaped margins, those are healing. The stuff that's fresh doesn't have any of that. It doesn't have a scab on it. Scab is an indication of older.
So all of these injuries happened within about an hour of death. Is that what you're saying?
Within a couple of hours of death. I think that's fair.
We've moved to fresh internal now, is that right?
Yes. So now we're still with fresh injuries, but now I've, for lack of a better way of saying it, I've removed the skin. I've dissected the skin away to look underneath the skin, because it's hard to see some of these injuries, particularly with dark skin. It's hard to see what's there. So unfortunately, one of the processes I have to do is dissect the skin away to see what's there. And on the back of the scalp, you saw the photograph, that 1.5 inch area of bruising. And the temporalis muscle, that's the muscle right here in front of your ear that kind of fans out, and there's bleeding into that muscle. The right side of the chest has a 2-inch bruise. Left side has an 1.5 inch bruise. On the outside of the lung, we saw the photograph of that 1-inch bruise that was on the inside of the right upper lung. And surface bruise on the lung surface. Didn't see where that one came in, sir.
Right pectoral, I think.
Here?
Yes.
Okay, so 2.5 inch a bruising around the heart. So significant blunt force there. And the thing about that is that you could argue that I could have put that with critical injuries, because if you remember, I think it was last year, the NFL player that got hit in the chest and stood up and then collapsed to the ground. That's called commotio cordis. Fancy way of saying you took a blow to the heart at just the wrong moment in the electrical cycle, and it caused basically an electrical heart attack. So I could easily have put that there, but I think the liver injury in this case is probably more significant. But that's not to say this isn't significant. And over on the right side, the adrenal gland sits right underneath the liver. I mean, literally right against the liver and the right kidney. And there's a 2-inch bruise there. So that trauma, again, it's deep. It's on the front of the liver. You saw the laceration. It's also on the back of the liver. So this is a, for lack of a better way of saying it, full thickness injury of the body at that site. The pancreas is, if the liver sits here, the pancreas is right below that and runs from the liver over to the spleen. And the pancreas had a 2-inch bruise, again, right below. So not only is this front to back full thickness, it's now going over toward the other side. A large area was involved. The right, typo, that should be buttocks. There's a bruise there as well. A 1-inch bruise underneath the skin of the right knee. On the back of the outside of the right calf, a 1-inch bruise. 1 1/4 inch on the left upper back bruise. 3/4 inch behind the left elbow. 2-inch bruise on the inside of the right knee. And again, the blood in the abdomen, we've already talked about that. That's repetitive from the others, just so you're aware. Okay, and then I said there's stuff I just don't know. And I think you can just run through these, because I really don't know the upper inner lip, the lower lip. All of these are the same thing. There's discolorations there. I can't tell you definitively that these are all injuries. I can't tell you that they're not injuries. I don't know. And then there's old injuries externally. Again, I think, we can do these individually, or I think if you look at them, you'll see that there's a 1/2 inch scar, scab and scar, scar, all this on the chest, 2.5 inch scar. And you see, as I mentioned, what battered child syndrome is: multiple wounds, multiple locations, multiple stages of healing. I think that you can see just on that right side of the body so far, this clearly fits the bill. That clearly fits the definition. Now you're going to see the left side of the body, the same level of old wounds. Multiple wounds, multiple locations, multiple stages of healing. And the 2 rib fractures, right 5 in the back, left 7 on the side. And then the bleeding, there was also bleeding to the stomach area and a healing bruise at that location. So that probably has something to do with the bleeding around the heart. But I can't tell you specifically because it could be 2 separate events.
And by old, you just mean older than a few hours before death? Is that all you can say on that?
No, the scars are obviously older, old enough for something to scar. But the scabs are fresher than scars, and there's a lot of stuff going on here. This is a lot of injuries. So again, perimortem is stuff that happened around the time of death. This is likely, a lot of this is animals, like the 2¼ inch area around the right eye. But as you go through this list, you'll see that there's a lot of stuff around the face and the head, which is one of the reasons that makes me think that it is likely animals. There's, in addition to around the right eye, there's an area on the bridge of the nose that's also looks like animals. And we now, just down here, are getting beyond the face and head area. So the collarbone, the axilla is the armpit. Then the area around the vagina, the right abdomen, the inguinal crease is right above the thigh. The brachium is the upper arm. And you can see the right forearm. The phalanx are the fingers, the right wrist, the palm. So again, lots of stuff that I think are animal. I can't tell you that they're actual injuries. I'm just telling you this is what I found. And again, more stuff. And this is, now we're getting to the legs and the back.
Is there anything else you need to say on this slide or not?
Yeah, this is just more of the same. I'm going through very detailed. I think I have 11 pages of injuries. Pre-mortem, post-mortem, critical, fresh. I spent 11 pages to document all of that. And then to kind of put it into context, because that's what you do. An autopsy doesn't happen in a vacuum. A subject who's been injured isn't injured in a vacuum. So all of this stuff is important. So if we step back and look at what we spent the past hour going over, the critical stuff is here in the abdomen, the liver laceration, that 2.5, 3 inch laceration there, the 3.5 inch clot associated with that on the liver, the 4 ounces of blood in the belly, all of those fresh external injuries, all of the fresh internal injuries. I put up the uncertain because I don't know and I don't want to tell you they aren't there, like I don't want to tell you that's for you to decide. I can't tell you they are or not. And you may reach the same conclusion I did. And then just to remind you of all the old injuries, or at least some of the old injuries, because there are actually too many, I think, to fit on the screen. This is important for the battered child syndrome component of why she died.
You indicated cause of death was multiple blunt force injuries, and you noted, we said earlier, malnutrition and battered child syndrome were other significant factors. Can you explain to the jury how malnutrition and battered child syndrome contributed to the death in this case?
Sure. So malnutrition affects the overall being of the person, the physiology, how your body heals, how your body reacts to an injury, your lack of muscular strength to withstand blows, the lack of muscular girth. If you, for example, take a blow to your chest, you have less tissue to protect yourself. So the malnutrition is important there, just like the battered child syndrome is important. If you've ever seen an abused animal, and you've seen the person that's abused that animal step into the room, you've seen the reaction. I've seen that. I have actual videotapes from prior cases I've worked of the same thing happening with children. And I'm a much younger child than Amari. Amari was 8. The child I've seen in the video is about a year. But they react when the abuser comes in. And if you've ever been scared or frightened, fight or flight response, what happens? your heart rate goes up, your heart starts beating faster, your blood pressure goes up, your blood is starting to pump harder. You're starting to breathe more because your body needs more oxygen. But if you're sustaining injuries, you're in pain. That pain increases all of those fight or flight responses. Actively during the process of her end, Amari is bleeding out of the injuries. She's also in fear because there's nothing to her head. She's conscious. There's no reason for her to be unconscious when all of these, or when the critical injuries are inflicted. So she's in fear. She's physiologically responding to that. So that's why each and every single one of those injuries, fresh and old, to me is physiologically important and why she died.
Thank you, Dr. Downs. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Do you need any of these slides, Rob?
I think the questions I can ask without the slides. Let's go ahead and do the morning break. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 10-minute recess. All right, anything to take up outside the presence of the jury?
Not from the stage, Your Honor.
Good morning, Dr. Downs.
Good morning.
Hopefully you can hear me and understand me with my raspy voice. Do you want any water or anything?
I'm fine, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
No problem. I just have some clarification questions for you, Dr. Downs. You did the autopsy on November the 24th, 2021.
That's correct.
Okay. And Amari, as far as we believe, her body was located, discovered the day before, right? November the 23rd, 2021?
Yes, sir. I did the autopsy about 11:30, and she was pronounced dead about 12, probably found maybe an hour before that, the day before.
Okay, so the day prior. Based upon your examination of her, can you put an approximate time frame on her death in relation to the 23rd of November of 21?
I would really be hesitant to do that for a lot of reasons. One is that she's in plastic bags, so that hinders decomposition. It's November, so the temperature's going to be important, hot, cold. She's in a wooded environment, so the sunlight coming and going, it would really take a lot more detail for me to be able to say when she died. In addition, I don't know if, because there's an interval, what the conditions were between when she died and when she was placed in this environment. That's not something I feel comfortable telling you a definitive answer to.
Okay, could it stretch from a couple of days to a week out, or you're hesitant to even go that far?
It would depend. If she didn't have any refrigeration, for instance, if she's in a cold refrigerated room, that would slow down decomposition. I would really need to know more about the weather, the environment. I can tell you this, if all else being equal, she didn't appear to have a lot of decompositional changes. Instead, what she had was animal depredation.
Because this was late November and the weather tends to be cooler
Yes, sir.
in late November. Okay. Well, let me ask you this way. In regards to the laceration of the liver, would that in and of itself have caused her death?
Not Amari's death, but if you took somebody in every other way, shape, and form like Amari and inflicted that liver injury to them, that person could die just from that liver injury, but that's not Amari. Amari had everything else going in that physiology we talked about with battered child syndrome.
So the lacerated liver, if untreated, that would not in and of itself have caused her death if the injury was left untreated for a period of time?
Again, you can't isolate in Amari's case one thing because it didn't happen that way. You have somebody who has this background who then has an injury inflicted on her. If you take somebody else who's not Amari, but just give them that liver injury, then that person could die with an untreated liver injury like that.
What would be the time frame for a person to die from the lacerated liver?
Again, exactly the circumstances like Amari, it's hard to say. If it's not her, but somebody with just that liver injury, I'm not a clinician, that is, I don't treat people. I can tell you that I would think a couple of hours would be probably pushing it. She had 120 milliliters, which is 4 ounces of blood in her belly. Her total blood volume for a kid of her weight, now she probably has less because of her malnutrition, but they would have 1.8 liters. %, say, and hers may have started at 30% because she's malnourished.
In your autopsy, I think you noted that she had a right rib fracture. Would that have occurred prior to her death, after her death? Do you know one way or the other?
Yes, sir. Both of the rib fractures, both the right and the left, were older. That's part of the basis of the battered child syndrome.
So it was both right and left?
That's correct. The left was fresher, but still old.
Can you put a time frame?
It's really, really hard to do. I would say with the fracture callus, which is when you get a fracture, the two ends of the bone come together and you get a lump where those two bones come together. On the left, that lump, you could see where the fracture line was. So that's probably weeks. And then the other side, I didn't see that pattern, so that's probably months, or it could be much older.
Understood. The blood work that was done, that all came back negative for drugs, if I understood, on page 20 of your report.
That's correct. So we send our samples out to the GBI lab, and in this case, we also sent out for chemistry to a different lab. But the blood work for drugs was all negative, and the other lab didn't find any drugs either.
Okay. And needless to say, this was not a case where you found any type of gunshot wounds, stab wounds, anything of that nature, correct?
No, sir. Exclusive of what we talked about, the multiple blunt force injuries and the older healed and healing injuries, the battered child syndrome, and the malnutrition. This was an otherwise healthy young girl that had no additional trauma.
And we've used a couple of terms here when the state was asking you some questions. Scabs. What specifically are we talking about when we're talking about a scab versus a scar?
So a scar is actually fibrous tissue that mends together, it meshes together. So you've got, it's almost like weaving it back together with tissue that binds the edges of the wound together and the skin becomes intact. A scab is a layer of dead cells, pus, dried debris that forms over the surface of a wound. That's during the process of healing. So while that scab is there, you're getting healing underneath the skin, but the skin is not fully woven back together. So that's the difference, is the scar means this is old. The scab means we're still working on it. It's still in the process of healing.
And I realize every person, every human being is different from the next one, but generally speaking, how long does it take for a scab to occur?
It can happen very quickly. When the wound is small and exposed to air, the blood's going to clot on the surface and can heal. I mean, I would say common experience would be the best way to answer that. You've seen those, but the thing is, you also have deeper wounds that heal more slowly because they are deeper and it takes more time. There are some wounds that don't get stitched back together. You stitch an open wound to bring the edges together to allow that fibrosis to happen underneath. The scab forms on top. Those heal very quickly, so those scabs don't last a long time. Versus an open wound, it takes longer, and I just can't give you a precise timeline.
Would it potentially be within a couple of days?
Depending on the type of wound. A deeper wound is not going to be a couple of days. It's going to be longer.
Okay, and again, knowing every person is different, how about in regards to a scar? Is there a particular time frame for a scar to
Where I
occur?
can tell you that it will be scarred, I don't think you can really do that. If you've got scabs, kids pick at scabs. That then kind of sets the clock back a little bit. Also, with her malnutrition, she's going to heal more slowly. So I really can't give you, I wish I could tell you, it's going to take 2 weeks. It's going to take 4 weeks. That wouldn't be accurate.
The malnutrition affects someone's skin,
It affects the entire body.
but specifically in regards to the skin, what's the effect of malnutrition on a person's skin?
Well, you're going to lose subcutaneous fat, which means the skin is going to be thinner, and you lose the immune response becomes impaired. So the white blood cells that come in to help with repair are going to not work as well.
Would it be more susceptible to bruising?
I would say probably it would be more susceptible to bruising because you wouldn't have the structural integrity. You wouldn't have the subcutaneous fat. So yeah, I would say probably more susceptible to bruising. And also depending on what's missing, for instance, vitamin C, scurvy, that condition, and others like vitamin K, clotting factors. Yeah, I would say probably more prone to bruising.
You also had mentioned in the direct, use the word fresh in regards to fresh injury or in the context of wounds and so forth. Can you elaborate a little bit when you use the word fresh in that context, what you're referring to?
Not to be smart in the answer, but it means not old. So I'll try to explain that a little better. Fresh would be anywhere from it just happened out to where the white blood cells, specifically a type of cell called a PMN, a neutrophil, that's the same cell. Those come in by a couple of hours. I expect to see those specific cells. Out to 2 to 3 days, I see different types of inflammatory cells, and I see red blood cells breaking down. So when I say fresh, it's somewhere from that just happened out to where I get the white blood cells, the neutrophils, and some other reactive changes, but I'm not seeing that second wave of inflammation coming in. So we're not talking 2 days.
2 days from the time, obviously, you're examining the
No, sir. The process, the clock stops when you die. So what I'm saying is, whenever these events, when these fresh injuries happened, was within that time frame of when she actually passed. So the clock stops when she passes.
So within 2 to 3 days of her death, of her passing.
Correct.
And when you mentioned in your report, Dr. Downs, the manner of death being homicide, that doesn't equate to murder, that just equates to death at the hands of another?
That's correct. Murder is a legal term. We specifically don't use that word. I am not an attorney, don't pretend to be one, don't know much about the law at all. I know enough to ask a lawyer.
Okay. So that in and of itself just means death, when you put homicide, death at the hands of another.
Right, literally the word itself is homis, H-O-M-I-S, side, to kill. Homis is human or man. One man or one person kills another person. That's all it means.
And obviously, when you got involved in the case, you can't make a determination, speculate, do anything of that nature in regards of who or whom may have inflicted those injuries that you noted, correct?
No, sir, I don't speculate, and I do not identify perpetrators. That's not my job. My job is to tell you, this is what I saw. This is what happened to Amari. These are all the conditions that are there. And it's up to investigators to take it from there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
No regret, Your Honor.
May the witness be excused.
Yes, Your Honor.
No objection.
All right, thank you, Dr. Downs, you're excused.
Thank you, Judge.
Take care. All right, any other evidence from the state?
Your Honor, at this time, the state would rest.
The state has rested. Mr. Greenwald, any evidence from the defense?
Your Honor, at this time, the defense would rest on the presumption of innocence in her favor, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's, wow, it's early, it's 11:10, so we're gonna break early for lunch today, and come back at 12:30, be sufficient?
It would, Judge.
Want you guys to be back in jury assembly at 12:30.